There is an abandoned mansion quietly nestled in the heart of the city. No one truly knows who owns it. There's no nameplate, no exact address on any official map. Locals only call it one thing: the house that eats people. Once a year, on a single night during the 7th lunar month, they say you can hear a faint tapping from the top floor, even though the house is supposed to be empty. Some swear they've seen a white figure drift past the attic window. Others claim that if you stand beneath the eaves at 3 a.m., you'll hear a lullaby, sung in the voice of a young woman who doesn't exist in any civil record. Why? Who lived, or rather, who was once locked, inside that room? Tonight, I'm going to tell you one of the most haunting and well-buried legends in Hong Kong's history. A story that a powerful family tried to erase for the sake of their honor. A girl declared dead, while still alive. Locked in the attic for months, in complete darkness, no light, no sound, no human contact. And in the end, she chose to bury herself in the night, until she became something no one could ever forget. So keep the lights on. You're about to step into a space where pain becomes a spirit, and darkness isn't just the absence of light. It sees you. It hears you. And sometimes, it waits. This is the girl in the attic. And if you're brave enough to listen all the way through, you'll understand why some souls are never meant to rest in peace. 1952. Hong Kong was still a British colony, a glowing harbor city. Dazzling at night, but beneath the glitter lay layers of secrets, fears, and lives that the upper class wished the world would forget. Through narrow stone-paved alleys still damp from the summer rain, trams rattled along the busy market streets. British men in crisp white suits strolled under polished umbrellas, while Chinese families crowded into tiny flats, lost in the daily rush for survival. But not far from the chaos stood an old estate, hidden behind tall iron gates and moss-covered walls. It was the home of the Cheng family, one of the wealthiest and most influential names in Hong Kong at the time. They lived in a grand Victorian-style mansion, crimson-tiled roof, mustard yellow bricks, massive windows that were always shut tight. Every floor tile was imported from Europe. Every painting on the wall was an original. Everything screamed opulence, detached from reality. But behind those gold-gilded walls was a different world. A world where reputation mattered more than kinship. Where a family's name had to be protected at all costs. In that house lived Lillian, her English name, though she was born Cheng Li Mei, the youngest daughter. Her mother had died when she was still a child. She was raised with strict discipline, studied at a Catholic girls' school, learned English, played piano, practiced Chinese calligraphy. Quiet. Sensitive. And her eyes always distant. As if part of her soul never truly belonged to this world. Her father, Mr. Cheng Wai Lung, ran one of the few Chinese-owned private banks during colonial rule. He was stern, reserved, and devout to the unspoken code of high society. Never tarnished the family name. Her older sister, Cheng Li Fun, was the ideal heir, smart, sociable. Rumored to be engaged to a British official. But Lillian, though beautiful and captivating, always seemed like the misfit at those grand banquets, those loveless arranged meetings. Those conversations laced with judgment. Her room was on the very top floor of the mansion. From her window, she could see the city stretch out all the way to the harbor, ships constantly arriving and departing, bringing traders, missionaries, soldiers, and all the secrets that floated between east and west. But the more she looked outward, the more trapped she felt inside her golden cage, where everything was too polished, too perfect, too polite, leaving no space for truth, for real emotion. Or, for who she truly was. And in a world where honor meant more than empathy, even the slightest stain could be reason enough to erase a life. Without goodbye. Without a trace. Lillian first felt something was wrong on a warm July morning. As she brushed her hair in front of the mirror, she noticed a small red bump just beneath her left ear. At first, she assumed it was a bug bite, or maybe a reaction to the perfume her sister had left on the vanity. But 2 days later, the bump didn't go away. Instead, it began to spread down her neck, faint and pale, like sunburn that never fully healed. She told no one. For someone like Lillian, silence had become instinct. She'd been taught that a proper young lady doesn't complain, doesn't make trouble, doesn't draw attention. So she covered the mark with a high-collared blouse and a silk scarf. But what worried her most wasn't the skin. It was the dreams. They started quietly, like broken pieces of memory floating between sleep and waking. In her dreams, she was lying in a small room with low ceilings. No windows. The air was thick, damp, and heavy. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her throat felt like it was being squeezed shut. She tried to move, but her limbs wouldn't obey, trapped by something she couldn't see. Only darkness surrounded her. Dense. Suffocating. She knew, deep down, she was being locked in. Buried alive. At first, she'd wake soaked in sweat, heart racing, thinking it was just a nightmare. But when the same dream came back again, and tiny sores began to appear across her left hand, fear started to take hold. Something inside her was changing. Slowly. But certainly. One stormy night, thunder rolling in the distance, Lillian awoke with the chilling sense that someone was standing in her room. She opened her eyes, nothing. Only the dim flicker of the bedside lamp and the soft whistle of wind slipping through the doorframe. She sat up, scanning the room, and felt a shiver race down her spine. Her blanket had fallen to the floor. But what was worse? On her lap was a damp, circular print. As if a wet hand had rested there, moments before. The next morning, she checked her skin again. The blotches had darkened. Tiny white specks were now scattered across her arms. Some mornings, as she washed her face, she swore her skin was thickening. Becoming coarse. Especially around her cheeks and temples. Her face, once praised for its porcelain glow, now reflected something unfamiliar. Not youthful. Not pure. But fading. Layer by layer. From that day on, she never slept soundly again. Every time she closed her eyes, she'd hear whispers, coming from beneath the floor, or just above the ceiling. Sometimes it was a voice. Other times, a light scratching sound. Too slow to be rats. Too steady, like fingernails on wood. She didn't know if she was sick, or being summoned. But one thing became clear. No one could know. Not now. Not when the entire world around her was waiting for her to step into a carefully arranged marriage, like a rare item up for silent auction in the elite's ballroom of expectations. The nightmare Lillian had tried so hard to hide, eventually found its way into the light, in the most brutal, irreversible way. It was a humid afternoon, soft rain misting against foggy windows. Lillian sat in the upstairs reading room, a quiet, forgotten space she often escaped to, away from afternoon teas and her sister's scrutinizing gaze. She wore a long-sleeved cheapao with a high collar, trying to conceal the growing patches on her skin. But lost in a book, she accidentally pushed her sleeve too high. The door creaked open, without a knock. The sound of leather shoes on wood made her freeze. She didn't have to turn to know who it was. Her father. "You're hiding in here again?" His voice was calm. Low. But far from warm. She jumped to her feet, yanked her sleeve down. Too late. He had seen it. Time froze. Mr. Cheng stared at the pale, blotchy skin on his daughter's wrist. The man known for his poise and control now stood wide-eyed, horrified. He said nothing. Only stepped back, as if distance could shield him from what he feared most. "Father." Lillian's voice cracked. "Please, don't be afraid." "How long?" His voice trembled. 2 months, she whispered, eyes down. He turned away. One hand gripped the window frame, the other covered his mouth, as if he was trying not to vomit. "Do you realize, this will ruin everything?" He never asked if she was in pain. Never asked how she felt. His first thought was reputation. His only fear was collapse. That evening, he called Lifun, the elder sister, into his study. No one knew what was said behind the closed door. But the next day, her sister's eyes had changed. No more subtle jealousy. No more superiority. Only cold calculation, like Lillian was no longer a person, but a liability. Within days, Lillian was told not to leave her room. They claimed she needed rest. Her favorite maid was reassigned. Her meals were now delivered by someone new, distant, silent, never meeting her eyes. One night, sneaking out to retrieve a book from the library, she overheard voices through the wall. Her father. Her sister. Lifun's voice was clear. "She can't be seen again. If Mr. Wu finds out, the engagement is over." A pause. Then her father spoke. "So, what do we do?" Another silence. Then, with a chilling calm, her sister said, "We'll make them believe she's already dead." Lillian backed away, one hand covering her mouth to hold in the scream. Her heart pounded, not from illness, but from the first moment of clarity. She was no longer their daughter. Not their sister. She was a problem. Something to be handled. 3 days after that fateful conversation, the sky opened up with a heavy, relentless rain that lasted from night into morning. The sound of water pounding the red-tiled roof echoed like a funeral drum falling from the heavens. That was also the day the world was told that Lilian Cheng, the youngest daughter of the Cheng family, had died suddenly from an unknown fever. The news spread swiftly among Hong Kong's elite, accompanied by a formal statement from Mr. Cheng. Her passing came too suddenly. We had no time to prepare. The funeral was held at the family's estate. Everything moved with suspicious speed. No autopsy, no medical report. Only a black-bordered obituary printed on white cardstock, and a sealed mahogany casket placed in the center of the parlor. Guests poured in. Men in tailored black suits. Ladies in muted kipayos, holding lace-trimmed handkerchiefs and dabbing away tears that never reached their eyes. Some sobbed theatrically. Others merely bowed and left without a word. But all of them believed Lillian was dead. They spoke of her like an angel gone too soon. What a shame. She was like a porcelain doll, whispered a distant aunt. Too young to leave us, sighed a well-known businessman. Meanwhile, Lillian was still alive, locked away in the very top floor of the mansion. Inside what used to be a storage room. A heavy wooden door secured with metal bolts. Windows boarded up, covered with thick black cloth nailed from the outside. That room had become her living tomb. From within its 4 walls, she could hear her own funeral. Every word, every eulogy, slicing through the floorboards above her like blades. She passed peacefully. We'll never forget Lillian's gentle smile. May her soul find eternal rest. Each phrase felt like a farewell she wasn't allowed to give. She curled up against the cold wall, arms around her knees, tears slipping down in silence. The feeling of betrayal now overshadowed her fear. She was no longer in pain because of her illness, but because of a simple, devastating truth. Her family had chosen to lie to the world to protect their name. And in doing so, they had killed her, legally. That evening, after the guests had all gone, Mr. Cheng and Lifun climbed the stairs together. They stood outside the locked door. "It's done," he said, voice hollow. "From now on, she's never to be mentioned again." Li Fun nodded. "We'll instruct the staff to deliver meals twice a day. No contact. And to avoid suspicion, I'll forbid anyone from coming up to this floor." "Permanently?" he asked, though his tone lacked resistance. Li Fun didn't answer. She only stared at the door. Like a vertical grave embedded within a house of gold. That night, Lillian didn't sleep. She sat up in her thin white nightdress, staring at the locked door. She knew she had just died. Not by disease, but by the complete silence of those she once called family. No one came looking. No one called her name. No one cried real tears for her. The funeral had ended. But the real death was only beginning. Time, inside the attic room, quickly lost its shape. Lillian no longer knew what day it was. Or even what month. Sunlight had never touched that room since the door was bolted shut. The heavy black curtain nailed over the window made sure of that. There was no electric light. Only a single oil lamp on a crooked wooden table, its flame flickering weakly, barely brighter than her own breath. Twice a day, meals were pushed through a metal slot at the base of the door. Always silently. No words. No eye contact. Once, she crouched low, trying to catch a glimpse through the slot. She saw boots. A man's legs. Unmoving. She called out, no answer. She screamed, no reply. That was when she knew. To the world outside, she truly was dead. No clocks. No calendar. She tried counting the cracks in the ceiling. Listened to the drip 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 of a leaking corner after every rainfall. But even those lost their rhythm. Sleep no longer followed night or day. Sometimes she'd drift off for hours. Like under a spell. Other times, she'd lie awake in the dark, listening only to her heartbeat and the buzzing of flies around her untouched bowl of rice. She forced herself to build a routine. Stretching in the morning. Reciting old poems. Speaking out loud to keep her voice from fading. But the more she fought for clarity, the more she heard something else. The silence gnawing at her mind. She used to be Lillian. The youngest Cheng daughter. The girl who played piano in the afternoons. But in this endless dark, she began to forget what she looked like. Her hair had grown long and matted. Her fingernails cracked and bled from clawing at the walls. Her once cherished face, praised for its beauty, was now a mystery. There were no mirrors in the room. And then one day, as the usual tray slid in, she stared at the cold bowl of soup and asked softly, "Who am I?" No answer. Not from outside. And not from within. She began speaking to the walls. Then to the cockroaches. She named them, one was Moon, another Ing. She told them stories. As if they were old friends. One day, she laughed. A twisted, crooked laugh. Because these creatures were the only ones who still remembered she existed. In that silence, every tiny sound became unbearable. The wind shrieking through the window boards felt like a scream. The sound of clinking glasses from lavish dinners downstairs made her want to smash her head against the wall. They still lived. They still laughed. And they never spoke her name again. She wasn't dead. But everything that made her human. Her memories. Her identity. Her pride. Was peeling away, piece by piece. They didn't need to kill her. All they had to do was forget. And the attic room took care of the rest. She couldn't remember exactly which night it was since the day she died. She no longer knew whether it was the rainy season or the dry one. Spring or fall. But there was one thing she remembered with absolute clarity. It was the first night she heard the knocking. At first, she thought it was a dream. The sound was faint, barely real. Like someone gently tapping a single finger on the wooden wall. 3 slow beats, then silence. She sat up, heart pounding, ears straining. But there was nothing more. Only the soft sigh of wind slipping through the old wooden beams. The next night, it came again. This time, 4 knocks. Then silence. It didn't come from the door. Not from the wall. It came from above the ceiling. Lillian tilted her head back, eyes locked on a small vent that had long since been sealed shut. She waited. Nothing happened. But inside her, a strange feeling began to stir, fear, yes, but also a flicker of something else. Anticipation. Days later, the knocking became whispers. At first, just murmurs, like the wind rustling behind her ears. But the more she listened, the more the words took shape. Real sentences. No source. No speaker. Only voices, disembodied, echoing from somewhere inside her mind. Poor Lillian. She's still alive. Not here. Not with them. People forget quickly, unless you make them remember. She covered her ears. But the voices didn't stop. They repeated. Each night, clearer. Sometimes they spoke in Old Cantonese. Sometimes in English. Sometimes, in her own voice. As if an invisible twin was speaking right behind her neck. You're dead now, aren't you? Or have you simply not accepted it yet? They buried your name. But your soul still floats, refusing to fade. Lillian started speaking back. At first, in whispers. Then, full conversations. She asked. The voices answered. Her lips didn't move. Everything unfolded inside her mind. Strangely, she no longer felt alone. She asked. Who are you? And a woman's voice, soft, distant, replied. We are the forgotten. Just like you. From that moment on, Lillian understood. This room was no longer just a prison. It was a gathering place. For souls left uncalled. The knocking. The whispers. They weren't hallucinations. They were invitations. A summons. From the dark. From the other side. One night, she dreamt she was standing before a mirror. One that had long been coated in dust. But instead of her own reflection, she saw another girl. Also her. But no heartbeat. A pale face. Hollow eyes. Hair tangled like seaweed. The girl in the mirror smiled, cold and mournful, then pressed a hand against the glass and whispered. It's time for you to remember everything. Lillian awoke, sitting upright in the darkness. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, maybe years, she didn't cry. She smiled. A small, quiet smile. But it wasn't the smile of a captive. It was the smile of a soul newly awakened. From the moment Lillian began speaking with the whispers, the room began to change. Not physically. The 4 walls remained. The steel door still locked. The oil lamp flickered as dimly as ever. But the space inside began to breathe. Not with air. But with emotion. Resentment. Anger. Fear. A desperate yearning to be seen. All of it gathered, unseen. Heavy, settling into the cracks between the bricks like mist too thick to pass through. And Lillian could feel it. One night, when she touched the wall, she heard something echo back. A muffled moan, like stone weeping from within. Her fingers were always cold now, and whenever she touched metal, it left a thin layer of frost, like breath frozen in summer. She stopped eating regularly. Some trays remained untouched. No one came to check. No one cared. The silence from the other side of the door sharpened her senses. Not a rational clarity, but the kind of clarity only a soul in denial of death could possess. One evening, she whispered a phrase she didn't understand. A language she had never learned. She simply repeated what the voices in her head told her. And then, the oil lamp extinguished itself. Darkness flooded the room like a curtain dropping over a stage. But Lillian wasn't afraid. She closed her eyes. And for the first time, she saw everything. She saw her father, Mr. Cheng, sitting in his study, signing a document to transfer assets. She saw her sister, Li Fun, applying lipstick before a party, face flawless, without a trace of remorse. She saw them clearly, as if standing right beside them. She opened her eyes. The room was still dark. But something had awakened. From that night on, small disturbances began to unfold. The tablecloth in the kitchen was always misaligned, even though no one had touched it. Hallway lights flickered at midnight. A maid fell down the stairs, swearing she had seen someone in white standing at the top, silent and still. But the most terrifying were the dreams. Li Fun began to dream of knocking at her bedroom door in the middle of the night. First one knock. Then 3. Then 7. Each time she opened it, no one was there. But in the morning, wet footprints appeared outside her door. As if someone had truly stood there in silence. Each night, the knocking drew closer. Louder. Mr. Cheng started to notice his ledgers scrambled. Contracts mistakenly signed. Trusted partners canceling meetings without explanation. He couldn't explain it. But deep down, he knew something was returning. In the attic room, Lillian sat upright in the dark, eyes closed. No more trembling. No more tears. She was listening. Listening to the whispers guiding her. How to come down. How to make them remember her. Not with love. Not with guilt. But with fear. She had once been the youngest daughter of the Cheng family. Now, she was a living curse. That night, the attic was soaked in an eerie silence. No wind through the cracks. No knocking. No footsteps in the hallway. Everything seemed to hold its breath. As if the house itself knew something was about to happen. Lillian sat at the edge of her bed, gently stroking a white silk cheapao hanging in the wardrobe. It had once belonged to her mother, kept neatly folded in a fabric-lined box, the delicate lotus button still intact. She hadn't touched it once since the day she was locked away. But tonight, her hands no longer trembled. One by one, she undid the buttons. She slipped into the gown slowly, deliberately. It was not a ritual of the living. It was a farewell dressed in silk. A death she chose. A death with intention. She brushed her hair. Each stroke like a ticking clock, counting down to something sacred. The reflection in the dusty mirror no longer showed a frightened girl. Not a victim. But something else. Something shedding its human skin. To step into the other side of existence. On the desk, she tore long strips from her old bedsheet, the worn fabric stiff from age, and tied them into a single, taut cord. Each knot, a vow. Each twist, a heartbeat dissolving into vengeance. She walked to the center of the room, where an old wooden beam still ran across the ceiling. A remnant of the house's original bones. She had thought about this before. But never acted. Until now. Not out of despair. But because she had seen the path. and finally understood why she had to walk it. Before placing the cloth around her neck, she whispered, "Not a prayer, not a plea, but a vow. If they chose to bury me while I was still alive, then I will return once I'm dead." At her feet lay a journal, written in blood and charcoal. Each page a record of forgotten days, unanswered cries. Tears hardened into hatred. She left it in the center of the room. For someone, someday, to find. She stepped onto the old wooden chair, looped the cloth over the beam, tied it tight. In the dim glow of the dying oil lamp, the white qipao caught the last flicker of light, like a soul poised on the edge of release. And then, she let go. No scream, no struggle, just the soft creak of a chair falling sideways. Then, silence. 3 days later, when the food tray remained untouched, and a strange smell began to drift down the stairs, a servant was sent to check. They knocked. No response. Called her name. Nothing. When the door finally opened, they found Lillian hanging in the center of the room, her white gown still perfect, her face turned toward the door, eyes wide open, as if she had been waiting. But it wasn't the sight of the body that made them collapse. It was the faint smile on her lips. Like she knew. This was only the beginning. From that moment on, they all understood. The attic was no longer empty. And Lillian was no longer human. She had become what old folk whispered about. A Marai. A spirit born not from death, but from betrayal. A soul denied peace. After Lillian's death, the attic was sealed hastily. Heavy locks were installed. Black curtains nailed shut. No one was allowed upstairs again. There was no funeral. No obituary. No mourning. The world still believed Lillian had died a year ago. And that was their first mistake. Some die of illness. Some of old age. But some die from being forgotten. And those souls, they never go quietly. At first, it was small things. A maid assigned to clean the downstairs said she felt a cold chill each morning as she passed the stairwell. Even in the middle of summer. One morning, she saw tiny wet footprints trailing up the stairs. By the time she turned around, they were gone. She said nothing. But the signs began to multiply. One afternoon, the cook dropped his knife, even though no one touched it. When he bent to pick it up, he found a thin, deep cut across his finger. Ice cold, like it had been touched by frost. On the knife handle, a smudged fingerprint, as if burned in by ash. Li Fun, now managing most of the family's assets, stopped sleeping. She kept dreaming of footsteps gliding past her door at night. The rustling of silk, like someone walking in a qipao. One night, she awoke at 3 a.m. Her bedroom door cracked open, even though she remembered locking it. On her vanity table, Lillian's old hairbrush, placed neatly, with long black strands still tangled in the bristles. Li Fun fled to a hotel, claiming business meetings. But even there, she wasn't safe. Every night, at exactly 2:47 a.m., the hotel phone rang. When she picked up, a soft breath echoed through the line. Then a whisper. "You buried me. But I still remember." Back at the house, Mr. Cheng grew quiet. One morning, he paused at the stairs. A melody floated down from above. It was Claire de Lune, Lillian's favorite. Each note scraped open a memory he had buried. He stood frozen for 5 full minutes. When he finally climbed up to check, the piano was still covered in dust. The strings, broken. But the fingerprints on the keys were fresh. He ordered the entire upper floor sealed. Not just the attic. A red talisman was slapped across the attic door. In the old Taoist tradition, the exorcist who placed it refused to take payment. He only whispered, "This is not a restless ghost. It is Marai. She doesn't want to leave." Since then, the house changed. Guests reported seeing a white figure passing behind the attic windows. A place no one lived. Those who spent the night said they woke feeling watched, even though the room was empty. One by one, the servants quit. No one stayed past sunset. The house grew cold, even with fires burning. And the name Lillian, once erased from records and memory, returned in whispers. First as gossip, then as legend. A girl in a white cheapao, eyes wide, lips sealed, and a smile no one dares to see twice. Year 2025. Nearly 70 years since the name Lillian was erased from every record and memory. The mansion she once lived in now sits abandoned, buried under a mess of legal paperwork and forgotten inheritance claims. But for Lilian Cheng, a digital creator who investigates Asian urban legends, this house wasn't just an old address. It was a question left unanswered. Naomi is the third-generation descendant of the Cheng family. Raised abroad, educated in the UK. She returned to Hong Kong only recently to launch her YouTube series, Ghostline, Legends No One Dares to Name. While sorting through her family's archives, she stumbled upon a faded document. It listed 3 daughters under her great-grandfather's name: Li Fun, Li Yun, and one name, crossed out in red ink, Li Mei. No death date. No photo. No biography. Her curiosity led her to the old mansion, a place the family refused to mention. She requested permission to film, citing undigitized family records. No one cared. No one believed anything was left inside but dust and memory. But the moment she stepped in, she felt it. The air was colder than it should be. Heavier. When she walked up the stairs, a chill crawled down her spine. Not from the creaky wood, but from something unseen watching her. On the upper floor hallway, she tapped on the wall and noticed a hollow echo. Trusting her instincts, she removed a few loose bricks. Behind them, a small wooden box wrapped in decaying silk. Inside, a journal stained with age, pencil, and dried blood. On the first page, in shaky handwriting: "If anyone finds this, please remember my name. I existed. I am Lilian Cheng." Naomi froze. Her hands trembled as she turned each page. A heartbreaking record of Lillian's final days. From her illness, to her imprisonment, to the voices she heard in the dark. The final entry, scribbled in crooked lines: "They buried me while I was still alive. But I can still hear. Still see. And I'm still waiting." Naomi dropped the journal. Her camera light flickered. A breeze brushed past her, though no windows were open. And then, from above, in that moment, Naomi understood. The curse was never broken. But she, a Cheng by blood, was the first to face the truth. And maybe the only one Lillian allowed to enter her world. If you're still wondering what afflicted Lillian, what made her a walking death sentence, The answer, according to her journal, was leprosy, known today as Hansen's disease. But in 1950s Hong Kong, it wasn't just a diagnosis. It was a curse. A social stain. Not just on the patient, but the entire family. There was no medicine. No mercy. Only isolation, shame, and erasure. In a society obsessed with reputation, the worst death isn't physical. It's to be treated as if you never lived. And that is what killed Lillian. Her story isn't just a ghost tale. It's a warning. A mirror. A flickering reflection of the world we still live in. In many East Asian cultures, especially those shaped by Confucian values, saving face matters more than truth. Family becomes a fortress of appearances, where honor is guarded more fiercely than life itself. Lillian didn't die from illness. She died because her family chose silence. Because they feared shame more than loss. Because they erased her, in hopes no one would ask why. And that silence created a Marai. A restless soul who doesn't want offerings. She wants acknowledgment. In Cantonese folklore, a Marai isn't just a spirit. It's a memory society tried to bury. A voice from the past. A verdict the living cannot escape, unless they face it. And the truth is, Lillian isn't just a legend. There are Lillians everywhere. People quietly erased from dinner tables. From wills. From family photos. Just for not fitting in. For being queer. For being sick. For being mentally unwell. For simply not being perfect. Society pretends they never existed. But just like that locked attic, the truth cannot stay hidden forever. One day, it returns. In a recording. A photo. A story passed down by someone brave enough to look. Maybe Lillian doesn't want revenge. Maybe all she ever wanted was for someone, after 70 years of silence, to say her name. You've heard her story. Now tell me, what do you think? Was Lillian a ghost? Or a reckoning? An angry spirit? Or just a girl waiting to be remembered? And in our modern world, who are we still burying alive, without ever digging a grave? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you ever pass by an old house in Hong Kong, and hear a knock at 3 a.m., say her name.